Welcome back to Beyond Four Walls, Conversations on Affordable Housing. I'm David Dworkin, President and CEO of the National Housing Conference, the nation's oldest and broadest affordable housing coalition. I'm joined today by Ed Brady, President and CEO of the Home Builders Institute. For more than 50 years, the Home Builders Institute has been training and educating America's home construction workforce. The Home Builders Institute was founded by the National Association of Home Builders and funded by the Department of Labor to create free pre-apprenticeship training programs for different communities to learn home building skills and end the labor shortage. Previously, Ed served as the head of a major regional home building company in Illinois. Following the 2008 financial crisis, he played a key role on the Bipartisan Policy Center's Housing Commission, collaborating with top experts to shape and advance national housing policy. He's been recognized for his leadership and expertise, serving on advisory committees and boards for organizations like the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago, Enterprise Community Partners, Habitat for Humanity, and of course the National Housing Conference. Its lasting impact on the housing industry earned him recognition in both the Illinois Home Builders Hall of Fame in 2018 and the National Housing Hall of Fame in 2023. Welcome, Ed. I'm so glad to talk to you today.
No, thank you, David, and thank you for that very kind introduction.
Before we dive into housing policy, and I did a podcast recently with Bob Brooksmith. At one point, he just stopped and he said, "We're so deep in the weeds here. Does anybody want to hear this?" And I was like, "Are you kidding? Our listeners love this." So we just went right back into the weeds, and now people call me and say, "Hey, I love that you guys stayed there." And
that's great.
Anyway, so Bob is a great guy. And we're going to get into housing policy and home building and everything. But first, just so people get a chance to know you, what's the most interesting and important fact about you that has nothing to do with your work?
Well, I grew up about an hour away from where Bob grew up, actually, in Bloomington, Illinois. But I'm a huge sports fan, huge golfer. I played college football, Division III, small college football.
What position?
I was, believe it or not, looking at me today, I was a wide receiver.
All right.
And had some great experience of 4 years of college football, paying for it a little bit maybe with my back pain, but a huge sports enthusiast.
Well, there are definitely less interesting and exciting ways to have back pain. So it's probably well worth it.
That's true.
Tell me a little bit about how you got into housing and your experience as a home builder in the Midwest.
Yeah, so I grew up with housing at the kitchen table. Quite frankly, my dad started his business in 1963, the year I was born. I grew up with it and went into the family business. After college, I actually went to work in the political realm in Detroit, Michigan for Congressman Jack Kemp, we all know as former HUD secretary and presidential candidate. And my father's business during the early 80s suffered, like many did. He was in a lot of multifamily on variable rate interest, and they just ran out of cash. And so he struggled. In 1986, after the presidential campaign ended, I went back to join him in restarting and rebuilding a construction business. We built 2 homes my first year in 1987, 88. Ended up in 2006, before the crash, building about 250 homes in a year. I've been in it all my life, land developer, multifamily builder, light commercial office building, but mostly residential. My dad and I worked in a lumber yard, so we've got real estate companies. And so I've been in it basically my entire life and most of my professional career.
I love that. It's an interesting span in terms of the industry and a lot of really major changes over that particular period. And we're seeing there's a little bit of deja vu all over again here. Interest rates, struggling with regulatory barriers. What do you think in terms of where we are now are the biggest issues facing home builders that are having a direct impact on our ability to close this supply gap?
Yeah, I mean, you said it, regulatory burden is a challenge to provide affordable supply. And when you say regulatory burden, in large part, that means land restrictions or challenges to densities, zoning and those types of things. I mean, that's a huge uphill climb when you go into a municipality and want to develop a piece of land. I just recently, because still in the business with my brother, although not active on a day-to-day basis. We just bid out a 33-lot development in 2015. I was selling lots for $35,000 in this same development. We have 11 acres left. We bid this out, and today the input costs alone were $47,000. And so for that same lot, that same 60-foot wide lot, 110-foot deep. So the inputs and the costs are just really burdensome. Lumber skyrocketed during the pandemic, and so did a number of other inputs, concrete, asphalt, fuel kind of products. They're not coming down. Lumber came down to some reasonable historic rates, but those costs are still elevated. And so that to be able to provide a single family lot or a development and an affordable, and you can put that in quotes, what is affordable today, but in many parts of our country, that's a different definition. But I'd say that is the biggest challenge to provide certainly first-time buyer supply, but certainly in the numbers of supply. Now, I work in the labor market. That's what I do on a daily basis. And you combine that with the labor shortage that we have, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit. And the last thing I would mention is to get into the building business, it took less capital. Today, it takes more capital.
What do you mean by that?
It takes more to become a builder and developer, harder to gain access to credit. The Great Recession, hurt a lot of opportunity for community bankers to loan. I think some of that's come back, but you have to have a lot more equity, a lot more collateral to get into the business. And so the leading builders, the large builders, the regional builders are taking more of the market share. A lot of the production builders have gone out of business because they can't compete with the leading builders. That leaves you with remodelers and small custom builders as taking that, and leading builders, the larger companies, regional and national companies, are taking more of the market. And it's tough for small builder developers to get into the business because of the competition and because of access to credit.
One of the things when I talk with regulators, policymakers, that is really hard for them to understand, partly because they've never had to run a business. And I get that. I'm not being, insulted about it, that or trying to put anybody down. But the day-to-day stress and pressures of running a business is a unique skill set, and not everybody has them when they're making these policies. And the time value of money, I think, is the piece that is often the most damaging and is the hardest for a policymaker to grasp. Help me understand how that plays in, how regulatory burden plays into the time value of money and the way that increases cost.
Two great examples, I think. One is, it used to take me 6 to 8 months to entitle a piece of property and go to development and build lots. And I'd have lots buildable in 8 to 12 months. Today, that's normal 3 years to 4 years.
Wow.
To carry that cost, time value of money, what that carry cost does increases the price that we have to start into the market with. So that's one, that the regulatory burden that municipalities put on builders, developers to get to even a buildable lot kind of accentuates that time value, what the carry cost is. And the second is the cycle time that it takes to actually build a house today. There's a lot of factors in that, but I actually built a house in Extreme Makeover and built it in 72 hours, believe it or not. But that's not the norm. It can be done, but we used to take 90 days to build a house. Today, it's taking 9 to 12 months to build a house. The factors there, the permitting process, the inspection regulatory process, the re-inspection. Last house I built hands-on was in Nashville, Tennessee, and I had 29 inspections for that single house. 29 inspections, from a stakeout inspection to a footing inspection to a foundation backfill inspection to all the, and then you add in some of those were re-inspections where the carpenter and the framing inspector found a nailing pattern that didn't work, fix that, and come back the next day. But 29 inspections probably ate up 45 days of time that it took me to get to the final product. And that 45 days, I've heard anywhere from $500 a day to, different numbers, but there is a value to those delays. There's a cost to those delays because I'm carrying the interest. I'm carrying that product. There's momentum that you lose. And again, part of that is labor. You're waiting for 2 weeks on a framing crew because there's just not enough labor out there. And so time is money. It really impacts the affordability of a starter home to a move-up home. People don't understand that those delays increase prices.
So when I think about these regulations and the inspections, I do want to make sure that my foundation is sound and my wiring is sound.
Yeah.
When you look at all those inspections, and I would say that Nashville, Tennessee isn't exactly a high reg burden area compared to a lot of others.
That's right.
How, if you were going to say, I'm not going to in any way decrease the level of safety and reassurance on quality that I would want for my own house, how many times could you compress that to what would be manageable?
Just start with the foundation. We used to have a stakeout to make sure that our setbacks were right, stakeout inspection, and then we used to have a foundation inspection. I didn't need a footing inspection and then a foundation inspection and then a backfill inspection.
Because you can do all that at the same time.
At the same time.
And look at the same stuff.
If the foundation's wrong, you'll catch it at the foundation. That's my risk, by the way. It's not, they're going to catch it eventually. But to reduce just that portion of it to where you got a foundation you can start framing on could be one inspection, maybe two instead of 4 or 5. And you can condense that into, typically we had mechanicals. We had electric, plumbing, HVAC inspection, a framing inspection. That framer was the final inspection. All the other 3 had to put their stickers on. And then the framer came in, put his structural sticker on. Now it takes that 5th or 6th person to come in and say, okay, that's consolidated. Everybody's done their inspections and I'll stamp it. That takes another day. You need an insulation inspection that we didn't need years ago. And so I would say when I was first started in 1988 building, that 29 inspections was maybe 6 or 7. And again, just time is money. And it didn't, I built the same quality of house in 88 than I did in 2006. The risk is on me, by the way. I have a habitability. In most states, you have a habitability warranty. And so don't get me wrong. There's good quality reasons for sound building practices, but there is just, it's been over-regulated to the point where it's adding costs that doesn't need to be added.
And we're going to come back around to labor, but this, I think, is really relevant to this broader conversation. From a policymaker perspective, how are all these additional requirements layering in there over the years? What do they think they're getting, and what's the justification?
I think to a certain extent, the industry has gone through, and let's take disaster recovery. You get a lot of people that come in for disaster recovery that are fly by night. And so licensing and some regulatory sides of, in many states, you're licensed. In other states like Illinois, you weren't licensed. You had to pay a registration fee. There was no meat behind what my license was. It was just I paid a fee. I think there's some credibility to licensing a contractor. Certainly over many states, they tier it if you're a remodeler under 25 grand. These layers and upon layers is just this, the safest time, you've heard the cliche, the safest time in government is when the legislators are out of session, right? If they're in session, they're looking for something to do. They've just continued to put these burdens on that don't have a cause and effect benefit. And as you look at new codes and as you look at zoning, I think everybody should have to look at what is this code going to cost and what is the benefit to the new code.
A friend of mine at a regulatory agency calls that the regulatory burden budget. How am I going to spend the reg burden budget? Because I don't want to defeat the purpose of the regulations by limiting the amount of things that can be done that I'm regulating. And I think one of the things that people also don't always consider is that when I increase the cost of a project, it's going to show up in the price unless it's subsidized housing.
Yeah, right.
And in that case, it's going to draw more subsidy, and I'm going to have less subsidy to build fewer homes. One way or another, the people who we're trying to help are paying for this?
You said it. It shows up in the price, right? Instead of building a multifamily unit affordable for $250,000, it's $325,000. The people can only afford what they can afford. So the $325,000 is taking away from another unit or two. And so it shows up in the price. All these regulatory burdens show up in the price, which restrict the supply or increase the subsidy. And we can't keep writing checks.
Let's circle back around to labor, because that's obviously a major driver of cost. And it also can be a driver of delay. Tell me a little bit about the problem and what it is HPI is trying to solve, and then let's talk about how you are setting out to solve that.
Yeah, so I call it a crisis. There's many crises in housing. One is labor, and we put out a construction labor report with Rob Dietz and the National Association of Home Builders twice a year. A crisis level in that and I think you have seen the notes, 700 plus thousand jobs we have to create or fill or replace through attrition a year for the next 3 years to keep up with demand. So the labor is, and there's a lot of reasons we can get into, but the labor is at a crisis level. When I have to wait 2 weeks for a framing crew because there's not enough framers out there, time is money. It goes back to this delay and what it costs and how it increases. As well as supply and demand economics play a part in labor. And if you have people, they get more money for the lack of availability. And so I always use this example. I sat on the side of the table where I beat up my subcontractors, my contractors every day to lower their price because I wanted to provide an affordable product. And the less expensive it was, the more people I could serve. Today, I sit on the side of labor and I say they need to earn a living wage and they need to have benefits, but we can do that without being inflationary by productivity and training the labor force to be more productive. Simple example, 4 carpenters, they take 2 weeks to build a house and you pay them $20 an hour.
These are framers.
These are framers.
And when we talk about framing, if I'm driving by a construction site, these are the 2x4s and 4x6s that are all being the wood, the sticks of bricks and
That's right.
sticks.
Saws and hammers. They're nailing pieces together and they're putting the puzzle together.
Pretty much every picture you've seen of Jimmy Carter at a Habitat site is framing.
That's right. That's right. And it's a great backdrop for a lot of photo ops for what we need in the housing sector. But,
all right. So you got 4 framers.
So 4 framers, they take 2 weeks to build a house. You can pay them $20. They take a week to build that same house. I mean, $30 and be less expensive. And that's all based on productivity. And that's the challenge that we're having today is we're retiring a lot of expert framers.
The guys who can do it in a week.
The guys and gals that can do it a week. More guys than gals, but the guys and gals that can do it in a week, we need to, because we've lost the industry perception that, this is a good career path. It's coming back, but we got to get more young people into it, get them to that expertise so that they can frame the house in a week. Because when they first start, they're going to take 2 weeks. And so productivity and training, education really makes a difference. And that's how we can build more for less dollars and the labor makes more money, quite frankly.
So how do we get people to make that transition from 4 weeks to 2 weeks or a week when they're coming on the site, and what kind of experience are we talking about when they start, and where do you guys come in and others in terms of training?
Well, at 14, I learned under a master union carpenter, and I learned to go get coffee, but I learned to nail walls, and I learned to lay out walls from a expert. Ray Stauffer was his name, a great man. He taught me the foundational fundamentals of carpentry and made me a better builder and makes me a better industry advocate. But it takes mentoring. It takes resources to train. It takes the availability for people to be exposed to the education and the skills. We've got some tailwinds on our backs because the cost of higher education has skyrocketed, right? Yeah. And many are taking college debt, and 60% of them come out with a degree, or maybe it's vice versa, 40 come out with a degree and 60 don't. But regardless, it's expensive, and the jobs that many of them come out of college with don't pay what a carpenter will make after 2 years out of high school. And so we've got that tailwind at our backs, but the perception is still a challenge to us because it's manual labor. It's hard work, but there's many people that haven't been exposed to it and many people that want to work with their hands and they want to continue to build things. And it's not just building things. There's innovative products that we'll probably talk about and how we can build in a more efficient and productive way. But it's been years of the lack of introducing the trades to people. I've had plumbers that tell me that are making a good living. They have all the toys. They have boats and second homes and stuff. They don't want their kid to be a plumber because everybody should go to college. That perception is changing. No college debt. You come out, you got opportunity to be entrepreneurs and run your own business. And so we just need to continue to market that, to have the industry continue to advocate for it. Ultimately, we need more resources for things that HBI does to bring more people into the industry, to introduce more people at the high school level into the industry. So it's a number of different factors that will help over time correct this. There's no magic wand that's going to do it overnight.
No.
There will be many factors that will help improve it. And I think although a long runway, there is a runway that we can reduce the supply and demand of skilled labor.
I think one of the missing components when we talk about student debt, and most students never consider, because they're never actually taught to consider it, is how am I going to service this debt? Is the education I'm getting going to result in a job that's going to pay me enough to service the debt I'm paying to get the education? And the answer to that is often yes, and that's great. And sometimes it's no. And then what you're doing is that you have to ask, is it worth it? Does this make sense? And, when we look at some of these skilled trades, we're really in a different scenario. And people can have a career, like you said, where they can make good money and not have to service that debt, which means they're going to actually have a significantly better lifestyle. And so that's the pitch. How do you make that and draw people into your programs? And then let's talk about some of these programs.
I think to that point specifically about the minute you take debt in a construction business, buy a truck, buy some tools, you're actually producing something to repay that right away. In college, you're taking debt on for 4 years and you don't repay it. You're paying interest. And so I think we've set young people up for failure in so many scenarios of allowing them to take debt. We got to be careful. Everybody should have the right to do it, but we have to be thoughtful about how, not to get too political, but how that is repayable, right? If you come out without a degree, how are you going to pay it? Many do. If you come out with a job that can't service this debt over a 10-year period, then you're set up for failure. There needs to be some reform in how college debt is applied. But from a construction perspective, come out of high school, I always recommend that people go to work for somebody right out of high school. Mm-hmm. Going in your own business is tough. Many businesses fail the first year. Go to work, learn the industry a little bit more. And then as you get and perfect and become really, really good at it, at a specific trade, you want to start an electrical company, you can go buy a truck and buy some tools. And again, the first day on the job, you're able to repay that debt. We have to promote the entrepreneurial side of this industry, especially in the small mom and pop business side and the contractor side. I mean, I'm a builder, right? If I were to do it all over again, I'd probably be an HVAC contractor. Mm-hmm. I loved building things. I loved turning around and seeing that house completed. Mm-hmm. I loved handing the keys over to a young family. But there's so many different opportunities in the industry that to say you're a builder and you should enter the industry with all the different occupations that are included in this industry, we just have not fully exposed ourselves and made that available to a large population.
Okay, so I'm coming out of high school. They don't teach shop class anymore. I'm good with my hands, and I'm pretty good with math too. And I'm thinking, you know what? I'd like to explore this, but I have no idea how. Where do you come in and help a guy like me? And then we'll talk about some folks who are outside of that kind of traditional path.
I first say that we need to get shop class back in. Now it's called career technical education in the high schools, but shop class. And you and my hairdo, you can tell it was shop class back in our age. Right. So we need to get that back because that introduces the career exploration, right? That's number one. And if they have a little touch of that in high school, then they kind of understand what it might entail. But there are different, I mean, you go on our website at HBI, you can go on union websites for the trades and building councils. You can go on the home builders associations throughout the country. And if you just Google in today's world, you just Google trades training, there's a plethora of opportunities throughout the country. Ours are free. There's many community college, adult ed type programs. There's many community programs, but you first just got to start exploring. What I like to do with our training is bring in contractors and peers that role models that they can think about emulating over a period of time because they then can show the success that the industry can bring. You look at a Mike Rowe and Dirty Jobs and some of the promotional stuff that has, advocated people working with their arms and haven't denigrated that industry. I think those are becoming more and more prominent. Gosh, HGTV, you look at flippers and you look at all these different things that are romantic in nature and are giving some inspiration to young people to get into this industry, which has been really good to me. But without the exposure to it, I wouldn't have known anything about it.
A young woman, I'm graduated from high school or I'm coming up on that. And I found out one of these training academies that HPI runs. What's my experience going to be in this?
So it varies. I mean, we've got transitioning military for people that are getting out of the military. It's a 12-week, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week program. It doesn't cost them any GI funds. Our wonderful sponsor, Home Depot Foundation, funds those programs. And so there's no cost. In fact, HBI doesn't charge anybody for this training. We do it through philanthropic endeavors or foundations and government contracts and so forth. But so you'll learn the basics. We are not an apprenticeship program. We're not a 4-year program where you go to school 2 nights a week and you're working during the day. It's a hands-on, you put 8 hours a day into it and you're learning. You mentioned math the other day. There's a lot of people that don't know they're good at math because the way it's taught in school doesn't allow them to know they're good at it. And so, but the construction industry, it's really interesting to watch some of our students learn how to read a tape measure and understand that they're dealing with fractions that they couldn't get in school. And so it's rewarding to see a lot of different types of learning in this industry that are just as smart as the academic, but they learn in a different way. We've got our Job Corps program, which is a wonderful program for opportunity youth funded by the Department of Labor that is a year program. And it's a residential program. High school programs, as you know, can be block schedules or can be twice a week. We do youth build programs. So there's a variation, but there's different opportunities in different markets to explore at a kind of a exploratory perspective or really delve into it and give it a year.
Let's talk a little bit about different ways to build houses.
Yeah.
Because, when I ran the Fannie Mae office in Detroit back in the 90s, I got this great picture that we had in our conference room of this guy unloading a Sears house off of his Model T truck.
Yeah, from a catalog.
Absolutely. And the reality is that today, a lot of houses are built exactly the same way. Why is that?
Yeah.
And how do we go to really mainstreaming and scaling some of these technologies that have been evolving for decades?
Yeah. My dad always said, when somebody said they don't build them like they used to, he'd say, and we're lucky that's happened. So to your point, I mean, modular homes in the 1960s was different than what they're building today.
Sure.
Technology has helped, innovation has helped. And so I think modular homes got a reputation that they weren't as solid and probably fair, that they weren't as solid as a stick-built, on the site built home. But that perception lives on today in many cases. I've done many, many developments over the last 30 years, and my covenants actually restrict modular homes. But today, they are built entirely differently. They're solid. They're built like in a climate-controlled environment that makes it easier to be true and plumb and less moisture in the home. And so It certainly has to be a part of our supply issue, right? I mean, it has challenges like transportation on modular homes and, what radius does it make sense to have a plant? The expense on a plant is somewhat prohibitive. And so there's some challenges to it. Is it going to make up 80% of the market in my lifetime? I don't think so. But panelization is another where even in the 2000, I was using panelized because the frame could be done, the framing like a puzzle. You frame a wall, you put A on it. You frame the next wall, you put B on it. You take it out on a trailer and you put it together like a puzzle. And it takes you 2 days on site or 3 days on site. Trusses versus stick-built roofs.
And I see those come in all the time now on trucks.
All the time. It's a great product. More true, it's more plumb, it's more square. It's solidly built because of automation and robotics and different things. I was just at MyTech manufacturer, who's a big supporter of ours, that manufactures these stamps that put trusses together and hold panels together. Those approaches are going to make a difference on productivity. There's no doubt about it. They have, and they will continue to. 3D printing. Talking to 3D printers, they have a lack of operators. They need to be trained as that continues to increase. All of these factors eventually will create more supply if they are regulated in the proper way and allowed to grow with the industry. But I go back to, our training is hands-on. I don't think in my lifetime the hammer is going to become obsolete.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen. And so it's a career path. But having said that, you don't have to use a hammer to be in this industry. You can use a computer. There's a lot of approaches. There's robotics. There's a lot of things that have become automated and have become robotic or mechanical that will improve the supply. But those types of innovative approaches, 3D printing, the fortified roofing, the trusses, the panelization, the modularization of, I've seen a dormitory put together like Legos. You build them in boxes. That's the dorm room. You just stack them on top of each other. That takes a heck of a lot less manual labor on site to put together. Time is money.
Yeah.
Instead of finishing that thing on site in 12 months, can you put it together in 6 months? And so we got to keep looking at those things.
So let's talk about politics a little bit. We've got a new administration, a lot of focus on the economy, a lot of focus on immigration.
Yeah.
There are elements of the immigration crisis that have certainly put burdens on individual communities. There have been issues around the impact on home prices in some markets. We can't pretend that isn't happening. We also know that in the history of this country, notwithstanding the fact that we are all descendants of immigrants,
right,
is the fact that economic growth in this country has always been correlated very closely with immigration. So now we've got this wave, which we have periodically, of anti-immigration.
Yeah.
And about a third, I believe, of residential construction workers are foreign-born.
Yeah.
A lot of home builders have been talking to me about they're very worried about this. To help me understand why this is potentially such a big risk for home builders.
Well, as you said, 30% or more of our workforce in the trades has been immigrant workforce, legal and illegal. I mean, there's been over the years, there's this magnet that brings people across the border because there's good paying jobs, and we need to correct that. It's illegal. We shouldn't support the illegal immigration, and the industry can't employ those people. They should be held accountable as contractors to make sure that they have the correct papers. This anti-immigration, I'd say most people, if it's reasonable and you have a rational conversation, are not anti-immigration, they'd be anti-illegal immigration. And I don't know, many politicians that I've worked with and for continue to say, have a border, but have a huge door on the border. And if we don't do that, then over the years, we're going to accentuate our labor crisis problem. I do think that we need to nurture it from a native perspective as well. So keep bringing in legal immigrants who want to work hard, that want to experience the American dream, who work with their hands well, and then bring up young people in the industry. And I think we can help. But the fear, and I think you and I were at a meeting together in New York City, The fear with the politics of this is if they round up all illegal immigrants, and there's undoubtedly some in the industry, right? In every industry, in hospitality and manufacturing, and certainly in home building. If we start doing raids on job sites and people fear for their legal rights to be here and those that they love to be here, we're going to lose that labor force, create a bigger problem before we can resolve it by training and educating new people. So I don't think anybody supports illegal criminals in this country. We shouldn't necessarily support illegal workers, but give them an opportunity to become legal and work in the industry.
Especially if they have skills we need. They're here, they have the skills. We have to recognize that door has not been big. It's been very small. It's been very hard to get into the country, especially if you're coming from a developing country with non-college skills. The H-1B visa has recently become a big issue. And I thought it was very interesting that on the one hand, you've got folks who are very anti-immigration in the new administration. And then you've got Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy who clearly understand how dependent they are on people coming in on visas so that they can bring those skills because they're not here in enough quantities. They should be, for sure, but they're not. And we have that problem in construction as well. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to be smart about this because, we aren't always.
Yeah, I remember arguing with Senator McCain years ago on the immigration policy about allowing H-1B visas in the construction industry. Mm-hmm. There was never an allocation for it.
Right.
And agriculture and seasonal immigration visas were issued, but construction's always been left out of that. And we've got again, I call it a crisis. It is a crisis. And if we don't start reforming that visa process, the supply is going to get smaller. We're going to continue to have poor housing, not kept housing. I don't know how many become obsolete over the years in multifamily, but thousands of units become obsolete and we're not replacing them. So the net continues to decline. If we don't reform immigration to allow construction trades as part of that, then we're short-sighting ourselves, and it will continue to accentuate this affordability and access to decent housing in this country.
We're going to pay one way or another.
Yeah. And you said it. They want to work immigration. If you look at Germany and some of the Eastern European countries, that you are a mason, that art in this country has somewhat been lost. These master or expertise masons. And it was an honorable and a profession that should come back. I mean, some of the best people I've ever met in my lifetime have been contractors, skilled labor. They work hard. They live well, they love their families, and they provide really good quality to the community.
It's all about the future of the country, and it's a lot about our past.
Yep.
My grandfather came here from Russia, on my mom's side, much further back. But, his experience here was he owned a junkyard and hauled junk. And my dad grew up hauling junk. It was like the Jewish Sanford and Son, except not funny. And
you got to laugh out of me.
Yeah, but it's that physical labor really was the foundation of my dad serving his country in World War II, coming home with the GI Bill, and ending up going to college and buying a home and creating a whole generation of Americans in the fullest sense of the word. And people who are coming over today who want to be in this country, it's the same story. I'm hoping we're able to see the forest through the trees on that one. Because you're right. It's like people shouldn't come here against the rules. New immigrants who follow the rules are not sympathetic to that either. No. They were like, that's the piece I think that Democrats have often mistaken in the whole immigration conversation is that people who are here who are not white and who are first and second generation Americans feel strongly about this issue and they feel strongly about it because they followed the rules. They came in here. It was not easy. And they're like, no, that's not how this works.
I think didn't that David show up in the last presidential election? And I have the same experience in talking to many of them that stood in line for way too long, by the way. I mean, 10 years to get legal status. I've got a guy that works at my office that had a green card for 15 years and such a great guy, patriot. It just took too long and was giving to society and continued to be a great employee. So we got to reform that line. The line needs to get shorter, maybe. It needs to get faster. People that have stood in that line do not like the idea of just this free-for-all open border.
Yeah.
They respect the rule of law. They followed the law. And those that don't follow it, they're not advocates of that. But they are advocates of their friends that want to be in line but can't find the line.
Yeah.
Or that the line's too long. And so I think that showed up in politics in the last election.
Yeah. And the pendulum swings. And the reality is that I think speaks to our age, and we'll come back to Jack Kemp. But I was a Reagan Republican and worked for George H.W. Bush. And both of them were really articulate and passionate supporters of immigration, legal immigration, but of the importance of immigration in building this country. And we need to keep that in mind. And when you mentioned Congressman Kemp, Secretary Kemp, I just, I adored that guy. Yeah. And he used to call himself a bleeding heart conservative.
He did.
And I love that. And when people ask me, well, what is your politics? And I say, well, I'm a registered independent and a bleeding heart conservative.
Yeah, I traveled with him for about a year and a half. I got to know him as a person, and he lived that. He started the union in the AFL.
Yes,
and,
right.
So he
was a quarterback,
right?
He
was a quarterback in Buffalo. His best lifelong friends were folks that he played with, and many of color. I remember a story. They made the playoffs. They got off the plane in New Orleans, and the white players were shuttled to one bus and the black players were shuttled to another bus. And he said, that's not happening on my team. That was tough times. And he lived that life. It was an honor to serve with him or serve for him, but he was a bleeding heart conservative, fiscal conservative, practical. His tax bill in 1986, the Kemp-Roth tax bill, kind of hurt my family and my dad at the time, but it was innovative, an approach that created low-income housing tax credits and opportunity for public-private partnerships. And so in the long run, he made a lasting impact on our community.
Yeah, the 86 tax bill is one of those historic moments in American economic policy, and we may have another one right in front of us. Yeah. These bills can have a huge impact, and I don't think anybody really thought that the low-income housing tax credit was going to be the foundation of building affordable housing when it was put in the bill pretty much at the end of the process.
Yeah, I think most housing advocates would advocate for doubling, tripling that opportunity for those tax credits to build more affordable housing, because it has taken public and private resources and created thousands of units, if not millions of units.
Yeah, it's working, and I think that we need to focus on what works. Yeah. And that's got a track record, and we're certainly advocating, I know you all are, to have that Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, the LIHTC bill, in this tax bill and get passed by Congress. It's one of the most bipartisan pieces of legislation that's in existence in Congress right now.
Hard to oppose.
And a part of it actually passed in the House last year.
Yep.
And this is the most partisan House of Representatives I've ever experienced. And it's hard for them to name a post office these days, but they passed that bill. That says a lot about the importance of it.
Yeah, my congressman, I got to give him a shout out. Darren LaHood was one of the champions of that at your housing gala.
Yeah, we honored him and others.
Our housing gala, it was an honor to introduce him, and I think that's the bipartisan side of it, is it provides. And I tell you, you and I have talked about this. Most housing has been talked about in a presidential cycle, and I was in the 88 and 96 and when Kemp ran with Dole. We've always, as the chairman of NHB, tried to get housing into the dialogue, and it just hasn't resonated. It's not sexy enough to talk about. This election, and it filtered up from council people and mayors and communities that are not able to provide just basic, fundamental, affordable, accessible housing in this country. And you've seen what happened in some of the maybe more progressive cities with homelessness and people on the streets. If they got nowhere to go, what are they going to do? And so I think housing was prominent. Both the vice president and the former president talked about housing.
That's right.
And there's policies in there that can help improve housing. But we have to do it in a bipartisan and a fiscal responsibly way. And I think there's a lot of smart people out there that can figure out how to do it.
Well, and we can do it. And I think we have definitely policies that are available to us to do it. People have been talking about it more than ever.
That's
and I
right.
think that's going to be really the line in the sand that decides if we've been successful or not. It's not that we're talking about it more than ever, but are we going to actually get it done? And you ignore housing at your peril. And I think that that's going to be true for President Trump and the Republicans as much as it was for the Democrats, who put it off for a long time, then started talking about it, but it didn't get done. And people feel it. They experience it, and they know what they are paying for rent, and they know how hard it is to buy a home. And that's going to have an impact.
Go back to immigration for a second. You've been in government. I've never really worked for the government, but when the OMB or the calculator of how many immigrants came in, and at one point it was 1 million, and then they adjusted that to 3.5 million.
That's not a readjustment.
Well,
that's a radical revision.
Okay. I was being
you are.
I was
you're
being
being politic, but the politics are yikes.
Yeah, but think about housing 2.5 million people.
Right.
And
absolutely.
The effect on that policy of our citizens, the ones that are here legally, and the over occupancy and over demand. It's not a single point issue. Immigration isn't about just labor, isn't it just about economics or paying taxes. It's about housing and healthcare and all these things. I think, we've got policymakers currently, and you can like some of the appointments or some of the nominees and maybe not like some of the others, but I think this time around, he's going to come in with a little less naivete to hopefully be able to move some things, big goals, this tax bill, and then now they're talking omnibus and tax and immigration and all these things together. I'm a little skeptical that will get done.
Yeah, I've been to that rodeo, but it's a good place to start.
It's a good place to start. But, I'm optimistic that this new administration really gets the pressure at the state, local levels to provide good policy and good regulatory policy that will help enhance supply, because that is ultimately, that's the first thing that we need to resolve.
Well, and housing is a continuum. And if you don't have enough homes for home ownership, you're going to end up with more renters. If you don't have enough homes for renters, then you're going to have higher rents. And ultimately, you're going to have more homeless people. And we've just seen the point in time count, worst numbers ever, really a horrific increase in homelessness. You don't really need to report to see it and know what that looks like in most cities in this country and in a lot of cities that have never had a problem. But I always remember one of the homeless service providers in Phoenix who said, you can give me all the money you want, but it's not enough if I don't have the units for people to go to.
Right.
And it just comes down to supply.
Homelessness is a different definition than it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago even. I mean, you've got families that are homeless that are going to work every day.
Absolutely.
Right. In communities that affordability creates homelessness is just wrong.
There's just no reason that anyone in America should wake up in a car or tent, go wash up, and go to work every day and have to go back to that car or tent, and what is happening there, that's just should be beyond our imagination.
Yeah. So I hope like the policy, and I don't know how you feel about this, but opening up some of the federal lands, you have to look at conservation. You have to make sure you're doing it for the environment in the right way. But I think there's opportunity in that.
I agree. And most of the land is not going to be used, which is fine.
Yes.
The reality is that even a small fraction of that in the right places, of which there's more than people assume, can make a big difference, because site control is a big deal.
Yeah.
And if we can make that easy, that's going to be the hard part, I think, is making that transfer of site control into the system in a way that your guys can make work.
Yeah. And ultimately that has to be the case or we won't build it.
Well, and my message to the new administration is the way you're going to figure that out is by asking the guys who do it.
That's
and
right.
Ed Brady is one of those guys. So thank you for joining me. I really appreciate you being here. It's a pleasure working with you, and we'll do a lot more of it.
I look forward to that, David. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Beyond Four Walls. You can visit the National Housing Conference at nhc.org. There you can learn more about affordable housing policies, affordability challenges throughout the nation on our Paycheck to Paycheck database, and explore membership in NHC for you or your organization. We appreciate your interest and look forward to working with you in the future. Until next time, I'm David Dworkin, NHC's President and CEO, wishing you a great day.